Recognize her smiling face.
Yeah, I know. I love it. Love it. I cannot wait. That's what we were saying like 20 years ago. I just watched it grow so much. Right.
I got used to it in my head. I've got Santa's laptop.
Scrapbook.
I know. Those were the days.
We were so young. We were babies at one point in our lives.
It was a long time ago. 3 kids and all that stuff.
Like, her babies are practically going to the office. You didn't want to take that maternity leave, and you were right back. I was like, wait.
Mr. Tim, I reached out to Richard about working with you guys on shooting a commercial on in one of your Grayton houses.
Good.
So he should have some information from
Okay,
me,
oh,
and I'll
good.
get it to you too
My
as well.
granddaughter Clara spent all her time in the Emerald Coast Theater, and now she's doing videos for our company, you know.
I call to order the meeting, what are we doing? Let me look. The steering committee of the Walton County Tourist Development Council for our strategic plan.
And we will just go ahead and we'll turn this over to Scott Beck from Jones Lang LaSalle Americas to start the conversation for you all.
Thank you all very much. Matt, good to hear your voice. I think we saw Nicole and didn't see any pink, so we hope everything's okay in Walton County. And we're very excited to be here today. I'm going to go ahead and let my other colleagues go ahead and introduce themselves. So, Fenton, we start with you.
Great, Dan Fenton here, oversee the global tourism practice for JLL. Had the pleasure of also being working in Walton County earlier, so just excited to be here and be a part of this.
Everyone, nice to meet you. My name is Brisa, and I am a support for the team, the project overall, and help with the destination analysis. Excited to be here.
And again, Scott Beck, it's good to see you all again. Very familiar setting, as that's where I was last time I was visiting. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. If you'd like to, could we ask the board to go ahead and introduce themselves as well? So Dan and Brisa have the opportunity to meet you all as well.
Yes, I'm Amy Wise-Coble.
Jim Taylor. Josh Sconyers.
Brian Moffett.
Jennifer Steele.
Great, thank you all very much. Before I start the presentation to share that, is there any questions that you have for any of us to start off in the room?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, the goal of today is really, and as it would sort of make sense, is sort of this initial kickoff meeting. We look at this as more of an orientation, and just to ensure that there's a broad understanding of the project and what it is that we have been working on with the team and intend to deliver. So today was a lot of information that we shared. We don't intend to do a deep dive in all of the content. This is really to take the time to ensure that the plan is understood and the process is understood. And then we will set time aside for what would be a deeper dive or some specific questions on an individual basis if anybody has that need, and or schedule time at our next two steering committees to take a deeper dive into any of this content as we update you as we go along in the plan. That said, if there's any part of the information you've seen you want to take a deeper dive, we can do that today. We're prepared to clearly address any questions or concerns, but we are keenly aware that you've just received the information yesterday, so we didn't expect to have a really deep conversation about the content. But if we do and we take some time, we can always push and stuff into what we call the parking lot, and we can address that at the next steering committee. So introductions, and then we'll go through the scope of work today. We'll talk about some key milestones. We'll review the project goals. We'll talk a little bit about the next 3 meetings that are confirmed in the schedule, make sure we're aligned with the times and dates of the board meeting. And then we're going to go through the 3 major parts of the first 2 phases that we've completed, the Tourism Readiness Index, go over sort of the comp set and review that, kind of maybe walk through some of the rationale behind that, then look at the event matrix overview, have a bit of a discussion of how that project, how that part of the work fits in, at least close out with the demand driver presentation. I think you'll see when we get into these 3 tools, this is a part of our work that really lays a foundation and creates a real important path forward for a lot of discussions that come in the second half, which again, we're kicking off this month in terms of market assessment and things you'll see throughout the time. And then we have some time for some question and answer if we need that. So the way that as an organization, we have this opportunity when we speak to people about strategic planning, we look at this as sort of the coming together of the various parts of our work. How we look at alignment and stakeholder engagement through the lens of the index, how the demand driver scorecard and event matrix give us context on what is in the destination in terms of driving demand, how the events are impacting the destination, along with the stakeholder engagement and that key partner engagement that we have, and then combining that with the other aspects of the more tactical reviews the brand awareness assessment, the SWOT analysis, and then the funding review, all will deliver at the end the strategic plan that we hope will guide the future of the destination and the plans in terms of how you structure and do the work around tourism promotion and serving the clients and visitors and stakeholders are there. I think it's also important to note that one of the things that we really believe in is that once we deliver the plan, we just don't go dark and go silent. We are here to remain as a trusted advisor and work through that plan. So this is the schedule that was part of our initial proposal. We've slated 6 months for the project, starting off in where our first visits were in May. Our second visit was in the 1st of July. We have our public outreach, which really begins sort of the later phase of the program, slated for late August, early September. And then we have the final presentation, the final plan presentation in person in late October, early November. And then post-plan, we have 2 check-ins that we schedule, that we take time and make sure that we have the opportunity at 90 days and 180 days to check in, answer any questions, and then again, remain very willing and able to remain as a trusted advisor. Dan, I know that you had a lot to do with the way these plans work and the layout. Is there anything you want to add at this point?
Yeah, I think the only thing is, even right as part of today's conversation, we definitely want to give you a sense of what we're doing. But if everyone, we always assume with the steering committee that that some of you are thinking to yourself, I want to make sure that something is included in this process, and don't necessarily hesitate, no matter how small or how large the item is, to make sure that we've gotten a chance to hear from you on that. Don't necessarily assume something's in there. It may be, but doesn't matter. What matters is, from the steering committee's perspective, that there isn't anything that you in your mind go, boy, I want to make sure that if we're going to go through a planning process, we take a look at this. We want to make sure in these first few meetings that we're able to really hear some of those thoughts, make sure we're talking about them, and make sure they're included in the overall plan process. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Dan. And I would, it's kind of, we can't really tell if someone can raise their hand because the image is pretty small. So feel free to just cut us off anytime. We can certainly deal with any questions in any way that's convenient to you guys.
Okay.
So here were the outcomes, or the project goals that we had for the project. So this idea of an overarching framework to talk about goals, initiatives, and implementation strategies. A very key aspect of this was the public forums that again will be in August, following some of the surveying. Develop a strategic master plan with all of the feedback, all of the work that we have done with stakeholders, leaders, and then identify some opportunities that we see through the strategic planning and present those to the Walton County Board of Commissioners and stakeholders for adoption. And then incorporate that feedback and finalize the future strategic plan with some defined action steps and some, again, timelines and goals associated with that. We are also undertaking the reserve policy review, and we'll have some recommendations on that also as part of our presentation. And then the goal is to be a partner, as this is presented with the county leadership and assist in securing approval and adoption of the plan. Are there any questions from the group on any of the goals or the processes so far?
Or again, thoughts that you think to yourself, let's make sure anything come to mind where, you want to make sure that we, if you will, insert it or keep it in mind as we're going through things. And there's a lot more opportunity to do this, but just anything initially that any of the members would like to share.
Hey, this is Jennifer. I have a question about the public outreach phase.
Yeah.
Does that include surveys?
Yes, it includes a very comprehensive survey.
Okay.
And we've been working with Matt and team and Nicole on finding the best time to do that. But there would be a very robust survey that would be out that would be promoted through the tools and various assets that both the county and Walton County Tourism have. And in addition to the 2 public workshops that we have slated for the project.
Yeah, so I just want to add a couple of thoughts there on the survey. One, happy to show the steering committee, or happy to talk about things that the steering committee wants to make sure is in the survey. Also, I think, Matt, you'd agree, don't necessarily assume, even though we probably know a good amount of the core members of the community that should receive the survey. But again, don't hesitate if you just want to say, let's make sure that this receives it, or let's make sure this part of the county receives it, or that we really are comprehensive there. So I think, Matt, you can tell me if you agree here, but I just think that it's a great opportunity for input, just to confirm that we've got a good broad spectrum of community members that we're reaching out to.
You're correct, Dan. I think, from my standpoint, the intention is not only to, actively involve the TDC Council, but, our accommodations partners, but all of the industries as a whole that, make up Walton County. I mean, I think if we're trying to, determine our path forward, we need to involve as many voices as possible to, learn what that vision is for tourism in the county moving forward.
Thanks, Matt. I think we've also discussed possibly, promoting this and calling this out on your social channels, posting it on the most appropriate and most convenient website, and having people a fairly broad outreach to make sure that both the public forum and the industry have an opportunity to share their insights. Did we answer that okay, Jennifer?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, very welcome. Any other questions there on the goals submitted by any of the other members? Okay. So our next opportunity to get together will be in September. So we are aligning this with the TDC board meeting. So just wanted to confirm that and see if, let you guys know that we are, again, prepared to have the same sort of rhythm to the meeting. And if there's any change, just let us know and we can adapt that schedule. But we see 3 more meetings of the steering committee. That last one, I think we'll try to schedule a little bit longer so that we can have a full, robust presentation. But again, between all those meetings, we are open and here to follow up with any questions or meet individually or, again, selectively as needed with the group. Okay, so this first project we have is called the Tourism Readiness Index. And this is a process where we have a set of criteria. It's a proprietary tool that we use, and the criteria has been developed alongside the WTTC, the World Tour and Travel. Remind me the acronym again, Dan. I always get this one wrong. The WTTC.
Yeah, kind of conference committee.
Yeah. It's been a very important tool, again, to assess in terms of a competitive set or indexing, but also to really align with opportunities with various stakeholders throughout the process. So here we go into the index. So Dan, I'm going to turn this over to you as sort of the brainchild behind this, and I'll give you some time here.
And one of the goals of this, as we go through this, is really also for the steering committee to look at this, because sometimes you think to yourself, what exactly is everybody going to be looking at here? And this is designed to show you the kind of things that we want to really look at with the steering committee, with the internal team, to try to see if we can surface, I'm going to use the term opportunities in this. Some of them, you'll see in a second, may be in areas that you don't always traditionally think of as tied to tourism, but we still think are important as it relates to looking at the overall sort of spectrum of where we are. So we're going to walk through the areas of the index, some of the overarching results already from the research, and then really we're going to pause at each one of these just for a second to see if, when you hear this, if it conjures up anything in the committee's mind where you think, well, now that I know you're looking at this area, here's additional thoughts I have for things we should be thinking about. But also to make sure the steering committee feels comfortable that by going through all of this, so first doing the research, but then following up on the areas that are identified, we've really taken a comprehensive look. And I think, Matt, again, you'd agree here. Remember, this is the whole county, right? So this is all aspects. We're trying to really incorporate every possibility or everything in the county. So whether it's beach-related, non-beach related, whether it's an area that we want to think about investing in the future in terms of where it could be, this is all part of what tends to come up as we go through some of the areas of the index. So we'll go ahead and go to the next slide here. And you can see in the right-hand side here, these are the broad categories. So scale, has to do with looking at things like what do we have in terms of broader resource to sort of execute, and you'll see some of the underlying areas there. Leisure, obviously we are, well-known, more than just well-known from a leisure perspective, but I think also, Matt and team, you'd agree, we want to keep expanding this too. So we want to keep looking at ways that we can enhance leisure offerings, throughout the county, that we can keep looking at this. Below this, environmental, so there's a lot of work that already goes on in the county related to this notion of environmental readiness. And so we want to make sure we're looking at this. We want to have, conversations with the committee or the steering committee to think about areas that you want to make sure are sort of probed here. Sometimes people think of environmental and tourism, and they actually don't think that, they don't understand the correlation. We want to make sure we're thinking about that correlation. So how can tourism actually be a positive influence as it relates to where we are from an environmental or sustainability standpoint? Safety and security, those are areas that we want to make sure we are going to, I think maybe, Scott, we either already have or we're about to touch base with county law enforcement, to talk to them, get their perspective on where we are, thoughts that they have about how we can collaborate with them going forward. Upper right-hand side, concentration, has to do, again, with sort of business. So the question becomes, even from a county perspective, are there opportunities to either grow or enhance actually business travel? Urban readiness talks about some of, again, in some of our core districts, what are some of the things that are available? And then the lower right-hand one is an important piece too. And do we have policies that exist that when the steering committee looks at them, they go, boy, this is a little bit counterintuitive or counterproductive to things that we're trying to get accomplished? Or are there policies that we think we should actually be sort of celebrating those in terms of how they help facilitate, tourism activity? So we'll go to the next slide. And by the way, underneath each one of those areas are several data points. And we won't go through each one of them today, but just so you know, each one has a set of data points that sort of make up those areas. We worked on, with Matt and everybody, love to get feedback here, we tried to look at ways to create sort of a competitive set. And Matt, maybe I'll have you say a couple of words here, because this isn't necessarily just areas that we think we sort of compete against. It's also areas where we're interested in sort of how we compare and how they're looking at some of the issues that we're sort of thinking about ourselves. So Matt, I'll pause for a second if you want to just take a moment here just to talk a little bit about how we tried to sort of, if you will, create this list.
Yeah, I mean,
that everybody can understand.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of summed that up correctly. When we were looking at this, we were looking at it not only from, a pure comp set from a visitation standpoint, but just looking at, some of the other areas that are, doing things similar to what we do, or other areas that are considering other assets or ways that they're kind of looking at their destination and managing their destination moving forward. So, these aren't necessary. Oh, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah. So here's an interesting steering committee question. I mean, I know that, some of you are seeing this for the first time, but when you do see it for the first time and you think to yourself, I've always wondered about how some other county is doing something or some other area is doing. Are there any counties or anything that comes to mind for the steering committee that you think that you would want, the collective team here to delve into a little bit, or you've always been interested in kind of what's the how there as to how they're doing something? So let me pause, ask the steering committee, when you look at both this list, but think about this question, because by the way, this could also be a specific area within a county that you know about that you'd like us to take a look at that you think would be helpful. So let me pause there. Any thoughts as to additional, if you will, either counties or things that you've experienced that you think, boy, this would be a great time to understand that better? Anything come to mind with the committee members? Yeah, maybe, Matt, can you walk through some of that? That's a great question, by the way.
I was just saying that it might be helpful to know the actual destinations that are in these counties that are listed. So
Yeah.
does anybody have any questions about those, or you want me just to run through each one on the list? Okay, sure. Beaufort County is Hilton Head, or that may be Beaufort. Horry County, South Carolina is Myrtle Beach. Collier County in Florida is Naples. Nassau County in Florida is Amelia Island.
Amelia Island, yeah.
And then Dare County, is that Outer Banks?
The Outer Banks, yeah.
Okay.
So I think that was a great question, Scott. We can update this going forward so we note county and then what that, because there is some similarity there in terms of that higher profile, you know, if you want to call it destination within the county that, you know, everybody would go, oh, okay, so that's what that's known for. The other thing, too, and I think, Matt, team, you would agree, part of the other reason why we pick some of these is counties where they have that high-profile sort of destination, but it's a big county with more than that in a sense. And so this question of looking at how we continue to, you know, enhance tourism offerings throughout the county, I think we're going to learn some things from some of these players as to how they're going about that. Consideration here on this set of you know, counties that we looked at. Okay, so just to jump in to the pillars that you saw before, and just to move through these fairly quickly. I think Scott and, you know, Matt, this will all be available. So in terms of being able to go on and click on this and kind of stare at this a little bit more, you know, you're more than welcome to do this. So the first area is scale. I'm going to hit a couple of the highlights here that you can tell we're looking at, you know, in terms of scale. And we're looking at things like, you know, for example, you know, how do we fare in, or I'm sorry, this is I apologize. This is the overview of the overall outcome. So if you look at scale, environmental, concentration, leisure, as something, as that spike, if you will, sort of heads outward, it means that there's a lot of things that we are doing that when we did this work really sort of showed that to some degree we had a lot of things going on. In some cases, we may have had more things or more activities or more positivity, if you will, in that particular area than others. Or when it comes to scale, for example, that may have been more of a physical issue of just how we are situated in terms of where the concentration of activity is, and then the sort of overall, if you want to call it the overall geography of the county and the areas that essentially, let's call them developing areas or areas that could have potential in the future. So if you look at sort of the way this played out, safety and security, there was a lot of things that we were able to glean that seemed, you know, like there was a lot of again, progress there, but also safety and security obviously we want to make sure that not only are there positive activities, but what are we doing from a tourism industry in conjunction with our law enforcement leadership to really be proactive in this space? And how do we play a role, and how does the committee see, you know, us being an active partner in this on an ongoing basis? Because I know, Matt and team, you would agree that the whole notion of how you are perceived, reality or not, from a safety standpoint can make a huge impact, you know, as it relates to how you ultimately build visitorship. So, so this just gives you a little sense of where we stand. We'll keep moving here to get into some of the pillars a little bit more specifically, but this is an overview, again, really designed to just talk about how we compare in certain areas. So we'll go to the next
and one note I would also make on this, Dan, is that the similarities in the spider chart between Walton County and the competitive set, I think is important to note. These are counties that are very similar. There isn't some big, huge outlier here. So kudos to Matt and team for building a set that is very similar. We're not trying to compare, you know, apples and oranges. This is a really good competitive set based on the way it has all come together.
Right, which I think really bears that when we continue to delve into the competitive set, what do we learn from them in terms of things that they're doing? So when it comes to scale, a couple of things here. Notice that, you know, overnight stays, you know, we're active. So if you look at our 3.8 million overnight stays that we have, so this is, and everybody knows this, right? This is an active, county, especially where we're concentrated from a tourism perspective. The other thing that I think is important here is the home rental listings, right? So one of the things that we think is important is sometimes people will talk about hotels, and really, if you think about us, we need to focus on how everything that we do also supports the home rental area, because that's got such a strong inventory here. We also know, and I think Matt and team you'd agree, that we have a lot of great, really high-end, high-quality operators in this space. So, we deliver a great experience here. So how that aligns from a tourism perspective is then how is our work in terms of who we're trying to attract, how does that also align with the home rental area and that industry that is so powerful here? And you can see our inventory at almost 18,000 home rental listing is well above the average for the other counties. Also, you can see that our hotel room inventory is below average. At the same time, we don't think that's necessarily a good or bad piece. It just really speaks to what the landscape is of our accommodations. And then I think from the committee standpoint, then the goal would be, okay, how do we again think about how we're supporting, that critical part of our essentially lodging, if you will, inventory. So we'll go to the next slide here.
You want to see if there's any questions on this one?
Dan, questions on this one? That it's an interesting dynamic there, and when the steering committee members think about this whole notion of how important the home rental area is, that inventory is, and how we position that going forward.
I think we're good.
We'll go to the next area. So concentration, a couple of things here. One, you can see a little bit of confirmation a little bit here on some of the areas that we just talked about, right, in terms of where we rank, in terms of our overall concentration compared to others. So, meaning we have density when it comes to the kind of infrastructure that's needed for tourism, right? But here's a couple of things to think about. If you look at this one that talks about share of 3+ star visitor attraction reviews, so you see that in the upper right-hand side. Here's an interesting thing to think about. And again, we're just saying this holistically, but we have the beach in particular. So we have things that are absolutely spectacular in terms of visitor experience, right? And I think, Matt and team, you'd agree, no question about that. What this sort of tells us is how do we keep thinking about from a developmental standpoint? If you think about how do we keep expanding the visitor opportunities here or the visitor experience here, if you look at that, where that kind of indentation shows in terms of the number of attractions where, whether it's TripAdvisor or other areas, we get rated very high. What this is an indicator to us, and again, we're still into this, so this isn't conclusion day, but just what this prompts us to think about is, are there opportunities? Could an outcome of this plan be investment in, potentially new experiences that could be part of the future? So whether it's ecotourism based, whether it's in districts within the county, this really opens up that possibility as part of the outcome of this plan. So let me stop there and see if there's comments from the steering committee just around that whole notion of, it's almost a little bit of diversification, but more importantly, it's almost broadening opportunities for visitors in the future. And does that make sense as a potential initiative to think through here as part of the planning process? I can't see nods either, so I don't know. Unfortunately, yeah.
I think it absolutely is something that we need to consider. One of the things that we have as a challenge is probably not enough things for teens in our community to do. That's been something we've been discussing for quite some time. So I absolutely think it has to stay on the table for discussion. Yeah, no, great. Other comments there, because I think, Matt, you'd agree, this is one that we've already, had some good thoughts about in terms of what this could look like in the future. That's a great example, just the way you mentioned this whole sort of family-friendly, specific dynamics of how do we appeal to, again, younger
the younger visitor, if you will, and all of those things are part of what that shows us that we have an opportunity to think about.
Well, and I think another one is absolutely making the bay more accessible. I've said that for years, and I know there's challenges to that in finding a spot that works for possibly even marina, but the bay is the most underutilized asset. And once you get up into those rivers, in my humble opinion, that Walton County has.
Yeah.
That's something.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead. Sorry.
That's something that I was wondering too, is density in the far end of the south as things, is it due to density here for space or inventory of real estate for those third-party attractions? Does it, that we're overall outward look and progress for inland, moving more inland with different things?
Yeah.
Is it due to that, or?
Yeah, well, and I think the other way to think about that, Matt, you can jump in here too. I think the other way to think about that is looking forward, right? Does this really indicate where we want to think about, again, kind of investment too? So there's the why of where we are today, but then could we begin to think about ways to really, just to the earlier point too, and we don't want to get into conclusions as to what those are yet, but from the committee's perspective, I think, Matt, you'd agree, it would be important for the committee to look at this eventually and go, yeah, we think that doing some shifts here, maybe not huge, but some shifts in terms of resource to go towards some of this could be an outcome of the planning process. And I think, Matt, you'd agree, that would kind of require a lot of collective support, because some of that might be a little bit longer term in terms of driving the benefit, but have some huge possibilities in terms of over time.
Yeah, I would agree.
This is Jennifer.
So we think this is a real opportunity.
I was going to add that obviously arts and culture, there's growth potential there, ecotourism, and I think downtown Defuniak Springs offers so much potential for, if not more overnight stays, but at least day trips and enjoyment of the charm of that city.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think as part of our SWOT analysis, some of those questions about why and where development has happened will be part of that context. I think what this really inspires us is that how we initiate those conversations, looking for the future and what we want to encourage and really work on towards future development. But that's going to be a really important part of this discussion.
Yeah, and I think that the other part of that, it speaks to saying, the steering committee saying that obviously we are a superior and we will continue to refine marketing efforts, and part of the outcome here is really focused on audiences and things like this. However, this sort of thinking about this kind of shift says we are also in the product development area too, and we're also an organization or a steering committee from a governance perspective that wants to see, resources thought put into product development. And obviously we've done that in the past, but having that be a little bit more of a clear outcome of this planning process, if that makes sense. Okay, great. Those comments were exactly, those are the kind of things, as you think about things, we'd love to keep working through. Leisure, just quickly, I mean, this is an area that, if you think about, again, from a core perspective, you can see how that we will index pretty high when it comes to things like, issues about retail, some of the issues that are here, and within our core experience, I think we rank pretty high. Here's an interesting piece here that comes out here, and if you notice this dotted line, Scott was mentioning how the dotted line represents kind of a compilation of the others. And here's an interesting thing, and again, Matt and team, don't hesitate to jump in here, is this also sort of indicates that walkability, so this broad notion of I can park my car once, and I really can do all sorts of things that we've got a very walkable experience today. This indicates that there may be opportunity there to try to think through that. And we know that there are things that are going on to look at this question of, how do we improve our walkability in general? But that's one of the things that we thought was sort of interesting from an outcome standpoint in the leisure area. And so something we want to delve into and think through. Okay, we'll keep moving.
I would also note on the number of visitor attractions that was an area where clearly, compared to the concept, that there is an opportunity here for Walton County to look to the future and how those visitor attractions are developed and where they're developed.
Yeah.
Another key point here.
Yeah, and that kind of ties back, that there's a tie to that in terms of what we just talked about earlier, for sure, right? This is an interesting thing. I think maybe this is pretty obvious, but this speaks to sort of the level of business travel and the level of that we sort of see there, and you can see some of the things we look at in terms of businesses, business class seats, that sort of thing. This may be an area where the steering committee looks at this and says, you know what, good to know, right? Maybe it's not an area that we would say, let's put too much time and effort into, but just important to know that we want to keep tracking this. So maybe as we get certain economic development initiatives in the county start to take place, maybe there will be some uptick here. But I think this could be one where we look at and say, great, this is important data. This may be one where we say, let's just keep tracking this versus, make a big change in terms of our strategy here. But you can sort of see that this indicates that, for the most part, there's a relatively low level, if you will, of sort of business travel currently from a standpoint of visitation. So we'll go to the next slide. This one you can see here, this gets into things like demographics, population growth, availability of workforce. This has to do with, when you think about urban readiness, where do we rank in terms of, if you look at the lower piece, the availability of workforce. This is an area that, again, we could spend a whole day on this subject alone, but where are we today? This indicates that we are sort of in the middle point of our workforce availability, but again, the steering committee thinking about going forward, what role do we play, can we play in continuing to advocate or support those entities or those agencies or organizations in the county that are focused on workforce development? And is there a role that tourism can play there just to make sure that we keep our kind of pulse on how this is moving and how this is going? And this is an example when we talked earlier about the different things that we want to make sure as part of this process we're looking at with you. This is an example of an area that's in our index that we just think is so important when it comes to sort of checking in and seeing where we are. Housing affordability, above average here. This is this is a critical thing when it comes to our workforce in terms of how we think about housing and our workforce and how that ultimately sets the stage to make sure we have that availability. So let me stop there just for a moment to see if any of the steering committee members have any specific thoughts around this sort of area of how we support our workforce and the type of resident, if you will, that makes up that group. Anything there that comes to mind?
I don't remember what the data said, but in the last strategic planning questionnaire, I thought a lot of the feedback was more negative about affordability. And that was such a priority for the tourism, should be a priority for the tourism department, is helping facilitate more affordable housing for the workforce. Am I wrong in that? Anybody?
I'm just trying to remember, Matt, this goes back, there may have been one survey in between here. I definitely do remember myself, because I was involved, that there were discussions. It was early type of discussions around this. And I think we definitely, just generally see that connection. And I think there's going to be a good, just to your point, is how do we make sure in this process we really come up with some definitive steps that could be taken here, or definitive support that could be given in terms of the, again, I'm talking about other agencies or other players in the county, but yet how do we support those efforts? Matt, I'll stop for a second, and I don't know if you remember that question. I think this has been brought up before. It continues to probably be even more of a focus in sort of the general world that we live in, if you will. So I'll stop there.
Sorry, I had stepped out for just a second. So what was the topic? Sorry.
This was housing. This was sort of, attainable / affordable housing.
Yeah.
And let me clarify from that. So one of the big differences is this is your affordability is indexed by the competitive set. So there are a few counties that are really have an affordability issue that are in your competitive set. I think the last survey was of local residents or people in the community, and I think that would be the context I would lend to this. Is I think the questions this wasn't a question. This is raw data from affordability metrics that are available for each county. So this is, again, a different context than what that last question could be. And both could be true. You could, compared to your competitive set, have a stronger affordability quotient, but yet your locals still feel that housing affordability is a really, really big issue. So the question, Matt, was in the last survey that was in with your last plan that Bill Geist team did, there was some question about how affordability scored or ranked during that survey.
Yeah, I don't recall what that said off the top of my head. I mean, I think what myself and everybody in this room would probably, venture to put forth is that we all understand that for a workforce, I think there is an affordability challenge for workforce housing in Walton County. Now, how does that, compare to our comp center? I think that's, to your point you made, that's a kind of a different question. But I think as we, look around our community and the housing that's available, I think, it's very fair to say that that's something we should be very active and engaged with in addressing that problem moving forward to whatever degree that may be.
Great. So there's an opportunity there, definitely. Okay.
And I think also
safety and
it's worth noting, and wasn't my thought, but Uriah Matthews had reached out to me, and I thought it was an interesting and very valid comment that he made, but that he was starting to observe and questioning as. Like, there are a lot of people that drive to work down here from my small rural hometown. It's about an hour and 10 minutes. And, but as Niceville, as Freeport grows and Defuniak grows, it's not going to be mileage. Travel time is going to grow along with that. So I think that's something that we should all keep in the back of our minds as far as when we've got workforce coming from so far away.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And I think what we're, I'll tell you why the steering committee's role here is so important. I think, Matt, you'd agree, is this is an interesting area where, for example, if an outcome is from this planning process where the steering committee says, let's put some more focus, whatever that may be, on a little bit of this, that if somebody says to Matt and his team, boy, I thought you guys were just 100% marketing, right? That the steering committee is able to say, no, we've worked through this. We see this as an important issue that we believe, that we shouldn't sort of ignore, if you will, from a tourism industry perspective. We should try to figure out how we can support efforts or what we can do here. So this is an important one as we work through this as an outcome for the steering committee to say, yeah, we really support this from a prioritization standpoint. And again, we don't have to decide this minute, but there's a whole opportunity there to talk through that. Okay, Walton Safety Security, this talks about sort of a lower ranking, and we're sort of close to average when it comes to the violent crime statistics and some of the statistics related to certain types of crime, and that we're average. I think the key thing, we talked about this earlier, so we'll keep moving here, but part of our process is now we automatically want to talk to law enforcement. We want to spend time thinking about, again, where is that interface? Where are there possibilities for us to be supportive? Are there some core issues here that we could, again, at least be conscious of and figure out how we could be helpful with? So I know we got to keep moving, but just a quick pause here to see if any of the steering committee members have thoughts about this.
I do. I think that's wrong.
Okay.
The bed tax collectors, we remit $60 million to this organization. Why?
Yeah.
Because we have 26 miles of beach and it's safe. I look at our guest reviews every single day. Safe. Now, sitting in this room, somebody might say, why is it so safe? The answer is so simple. We do not have a city 3 miles inland from our beach. We have no homeless population. We have no mass transportation bringing the dregs of society down to where no one would want to go out of their house, much less take their family to the beach. If you come here, you're going to sit on the beach with somebody else on vacation, maybe somebody that lives here. I can show you, gentlemen and ladies, we can go to every single beach in America. Let's start in New England and work our way down, and they're all going to have an urban center that's going to have all the riffraff, the homeless, the drugs. We, Walton County, and Destin and Okaloosa County, I venture to guess we may be the only two counties in America that don't have, and I've used Birmingham as an example, and I know it's a lovely city, but if we had a city that size, 3 miles inland, we wouldn't be sitting here today, folks. My guests all come for the beach. They're not coming to swing off a rope into a creek or a river. We're not Dollywood. We're not some part of the country trying to say, what can we do? Well, 7% interest rates are going to keep anybody from buying anything. Thousands and thousands and thousands of apartments have all been built at the same time. The vacancy ratio on those is just going to go through the roof. Why? Who can pay $2,000 a month? But those are all things employers pay more money. But the safety and security, that's the only reason we've got this kind of money to spend here is this is so safe, so nice. And people don't realize we have the Gulf of Mexico, we're on an island, then we have the Bay, we have Freeport and Defuniak, and then we have Eglin Air Force Base. We are surrounded. So, and that's why Okaloosa County and Walton County, we're going to continue to prosper, whether it's tourism, why the quality of life, we hear that always said by every single, the quality of life here could not be better because it's safe. It's safe. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And really, again, designed to probe just that point and making sure that if anything, I think, are there measures just to make sure that we're both conscious of that, and we also kind of, from a future perspective, are there things we should be thinking about just to make sure that that dynamic that you're talking about stays, right? So
I might suggest from
really helpful
from a guest perspective, like a guest perception standpoint. I think probably what's more important on this topic than property crime or violent crime is beach safety. Can we come to the beach, right, and know that we've got lifeguards, we've got emergency services, we've got whatever it happens to be. I think that's I can't think of a guest that's kind of to Tim's point that would ever consider, hey, like, am I going to go to 30A and be safe or not? From a crime standpoint, I think it's more, can we safely take our kids to the beach? And crossing 30A is more dangerous than than stepping out of your home, right? So. Anyway, just my 2 cents.
That's great. Great. Okay. We'll move on to it's very helpful. Go on to the next last piece here. So again, environmental, right? This is an interesting area in terms of two things. One is sort of looking at some of the current, this was mentioned in terms of some of the beach activity that relates to environmental, if you will, protection and the things that we're already doing. And then also the sort of resiliency side of continuing to think about natural disasters, and are there thoughts around or things we could do from a preventative nature or support those that are focused in that area from a tourism perspective. So this area of thinking about environmental really speaks to, again, where can we from an industry perspective engage here, support the sort of structure that we have, or ways that we are expending time and effort around some of these areas. So we'll stop here, but what we hope this whole review of all this, where we hope this helps the steering committee, is to go, okay, so we're looking at all these areas. So this is part of the, if you will, the planning process, is to think through these. And as we come up with potential priorities or thoughts together, this is where, like the comment that was just made, which is hugely helpful around safety and security, how does that ultimately surface from a standpoint of, here's an extreme benefit that we have, and then again, how do we continue to think about how the industry, if you will, protects that or thinks about that in the future, and where are some of these shifts, if they are, in prioritization. They may not be major, but even small shifts can be transformational in terms of looking at some of these areas that we've just gone through. So we'll stop there. Hopefully that helps the steering committee think about the breadth of opportunity in this process, and we really, really value all the comments. You know, the part of the joys of being able to record this is we can make sure we're taking notes on everything that's being mentioned and that we're sort of feeding all of your comments into this. And that's the goal every time that we meet, is to have the kind of dialogue we just had, really helpful. And Scott, I'll turn it back to you.
Great,
real quickly,
thanks.
before we move on, if
Go
you
ahead.
don't mind.
Someone from the committee has something?
Yeah, so, you know, the safety and security conversation kind of prompted something for me, and that's, you know, I think we've got great quantitative data here that we're measuring against our competitive comp set. What I'm curious in, though, is do we have any data or feedback, whether it's quantitative or even just, you know, just anecdotal, as to how our guests view these particular topics? Because at the end of the day, it's great to have an advantage, or maybe know that you have a challenge, you know, compared to your competitive comp set. But I think more importantly is what do our guests think about these things? How do they value them, and how do they perceive Walton County versus some of these other potential destinations?
Yeah. Well, and I think
go ahead. Oh, go ahead, Dan.
Well, I just think there's two pieces there. One, let's look at that question in the planning process, but I also think, you know, sort of mad the team too, let's think about how we, you know, how do we sort of stay on that pulse on an ongoing basis too? So A, what do we know, you know, both anecdotally and qualitatively, but is there a way to, because I think what you're saying is critical, and then what's a good way to keep that pulse all the time, right? So, so we'll definitely think through that, both today and future.
And we have a little insight on that from some of the stakeholder engagement that I've had. It is clear that that is a real value that the guests see and that the community has around it. It is a very safe place to be. As we get into these next two opportunities and move away from sort of the quantitative, data-driven, competitive set sort of indexing, these next two opportunities are much more contextual, and especially the demand driver, which we're not going to get to today in any great depth, but there is clearly a sense from that demand driver that safety and security doesn't come up as a big concern. Our research there is really one that's done online with looking at these venues, looking at these experiences, and really vetting them. And then as we go through that process, it's really easy to see that safety and security is not raised as a concern, and people are feeling very comfortable about the scope and scale of what those demand drivers are and their ability to access them. So I think it is a little bit qualitative at this point, but we certainly can do from the perspective of operators. There is an ability for us to survey and on some level aggregate some of the information you all have on your guests to see if we need to validate that from a little more data background. But I think the comments we've heard today validate everything we're hearing and sensing that people feel that it is one of the, I guess, most valued assets of the community, is that it does feel very safe. Okay.
Add one
in the
thing
interest of
before
time,
we move on.
we'll kind of go through these really quickly. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, just one thing that I wanted to consider, and it kind of touches on a few pillars, but just the development or overdevelopment in our county and how that affects urban readiness, the environment, concentration, negative effects and positive effects. I think that's something to consider as well.
Yeah, I mean, just want to say one thing here. I mean, the question there becomes the intersection in between sort of tourism and economic development, and how do we use this planning process to think about that, because I think that's an important piece, especially as it relates to other parts of the county, and making sure that those kind of considerations are part of how we make decisions, which may or may not be as present as they could be today. So that's a great one.
Yeah, because they already are making decisions on our marketing budget. I think, Amy, you said 30,000 new. You were at the BCC meeting last month. I thought you said there were 30,000 new units on the market.
No, there's only 17,000 total.
Maybe you said 3,000. But it is affecting. It affects the TDC. It affects our budget. And you know, the phrase. Somebody just said it. We kill the goose that laid the golden egg. I think that's just something that we should consider when we're talking
Yeah.
about how like safety and security and affects the draw of our beaches. I think the same could be said for the community, the county-wide resources, natural resources.
Yeah.
Wrong way. Probably what I was referencing is, as I noted in our May financial report today, that we're only 1% down in TDT collections, which is outstanding, but on the amount of additional inventory, which probably was, that 3,000 number might have been right in there. But when you're collecting from that many more people, you have to understand the individual homeowner and the individual vacation rental management company is feeling that impact very, very differently than what we may feel here as a TDC, if that makes sense.
Because on average, we're pacing about gaining a little over 1,000 units a year, and that's been that way consistently for about the past 6 or 7 years. So that inventory has increased dramatically.
Yeah, and I think some of that we couldn't hear exactly, but I think the point is, as inventory increases, see if I'm paraphrasing this correctly, the way you sort of analyze success is there's more to it than whether just total revenue went up, because it's also about how active is, I think, Matt, the new inventory, and what's, for lack of a better term, kind of what is our occupancy there, and how does that all factor into quote unquote success. The other question that I know is an ongoing question, because we've had the opportunity to work together before, is this ongoing question of during the peak times, what's the strategy? What's the sort of management strategy during the peak times too that we want to keep thinking about, right? So I'll stop there. I don't know if that was the nature of that comment, but it's absolutely important to look at that inventory question in terms of how it factors in.
It definitely came up in the stakeholder engagement where, while again, total revenue for the community can rise, individual unit revenue has dropped. And I think it is a very important part to talk about from a strategy perspective. And as Dan noted, I think it needs to be looked at through the lens of both seasonality and then where opportunity to grow is, and see if there's strategies that can relate to that evening out of the curve as some of us talk about. So in the interest of time, we'll quickly go through the event matrix and what this is. This really is a look at leisure events. Again, you've got this information in front of you, so I think the idea here is the importance of leisure events play in driving overnight visitation. So this tool that we use goes through a set of 10 criteria that are evaluated and then weighted. We have an example of what that scoring thing looks like, or our scoring matrix looks like, and I think it is something that we've talked to Matt and team about reviewing how this aligns with some of the event discussions that I was able to participate in and watch last time I was in the community. But this idea of how the events drive the overall impact on the destination, and then we rank these events based on this criteria and score them. And I think that there are some really moments of really importance here in this, and I think again what we're doing is putting a point in time and then looking at all of this collecting information and seeing if there's a recommendation to be made. And I think to kind of simplify it, the sort of two things to look at from an event perspective is, one, an event strategy that is looking about how to create opportunities for people when they're in the market. And there are a lot of communities that spend a lot of time developing events that service the needs of the people who are coming to visit. And then there's another opportunity with events is looking at them as real event drivers and building occupancy in off-season of times when you're not in the peak season. Neither one is right or wrong. It's which is the most appropriate strategy to develop. So in this, you can see that there is quite a range of the attractiveness of the various events. And clearly there's 5 really big major events that are of the national draw that are really, really important. And we'll take a deeper dive with the steering committee in our next meeting about how this impacts strategy and have some really serious discussions about what that event strategy should look like in the future, and what the next 3 to 5 years of an event strategy can look like. Again, go ahead, Dan.
I just wanted to go back, if you don't mind, Scott, just real quick. I know we got to jump here, but we're gonna go over this again. But back to the steering committee, sort of stepping back and thinking about this. This is another area where we really believe that there is an opportunity to say, where are we investing time, energy, resources, and for what purposes? And to Scott's point, what events do we think to ourselves, okay, those really have potential, so let's focus our time there and not necessarily spreading them over all the events, if you will. And there's some great events that we have that really are more either kind of community-based or they're not necessarily designed specifically to accomplish a specific sort of tourism strategy, if you will, and an opportunity to work with the steering committee on this and come out with an outcome that says, here is where we're going to focus time, energy, and effort, and there's a strategic reason for that. And again, we have to jump off, but in the next meeting, we're really looking forward to talking through that with everybody. So Scott, back to you.
Okay. And then the last part of the packet today was the demand driver scorecard. And while visually it appears to be very similar to the event matrix, this is a little, quite a bit different in terms of how it relates to our strategy. So again, a similar scoring process of 8 different factors that are done. This is all done with some online research, and then a lot of work with Matt and his team went into developing and ensuring that we had the right demand drivers. And I think what's really important to look at as it relates to opportunities for development is as we get down to this sort of overall, and I think this is some of the key areas where we will take a little deeper dive in the categories. And I know we've called out art and culture and early on as a real opportunity. I think, you know, our overview of demand drivers validates that there's opportunity to grow in the art and culture and what we can do to create more demand drivers to drive tourism to be part of that community. So I think this is some very, very important information that will drive those future strategy discussions around future development and opportunities to look at the market from the lens of future-proofing and aligning opportunities with the strategy. So I think we're at our hour. I know we started a little bit late. We're sorry for running over a little bit, but wanted to see if there's any last things we need before we wrap up the steering committee today, and thank you immensely for your time.
Any questions?
Yeah. We're good at staff level. Any questions or any comments for the JLL team from the committee?
I found this very informative. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, really look forward to, you know, coming back, and hopefully this helps everybody start to think about things that you want to make sure are part of this process. And so we're really looking forward to continuing this type of dialogue throughout.
Thank you all, and again, Matt and team, thank you for all the work with that. There's a lot of time that Matt and team spent on the demand drivers, the event matrix, and obviously on the comp set work. So thank you all, and we'll look forward to our next meeting and watch for some information before then.
Thanks, Scott.
Great.
Sounds great.
Thank you, team. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey, thank you.
Motion to adjourn?
Goodbye.
Second?
Second.
No more public comment. Just kidding. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. See you again soon. Oh, sorry. Josh did the motion to adjourn. Tim seconded. Unanimous. Oh, sorry. Jennifer seconded. I think you guys tied.
Obviously, we're doing.